Let's have a look at how we went from this to this in just 48 hours during the Game Maker's Toolkit 2023 Game Jam in July of 2023. Me and my two friends who I did the Brackies Game Jam with decided at the last minute to do the GMTK Game Jam. We wanted to be relaxed, and I was planning on sleeping a full 8 hours at night, so I'd only spend around 15 to 20 hours coding the game. The jam started at 7 PM our local time. I was a bit nervous as I haven't coded anything or done any game development in weeks, so I was a bit rusty, but I was hoping coding is like riding a bike. If you want to play the game, there's a link in the description. The theme was Roles Reversed. We brainstormed about games where children would bring Santa Claus gifts, or a Lemmings clone where you try to kill as many lemmings as possible. I really liked the idea of having two states like a stealth game with the lights on or off. I kinda pushed this idea on my friends, and somehow the idea developed into an anglerfish game where you take turns being the hunter or the hunted. What you're seeing on screen is the only thing we made on Friday before going to bed. No coding or art yet. I started coding around 9:30 in the morning with player input and player movement. I was hoping I could get away with not using Unity's physics system for movement, so I used a transform component to move the player. This turned out to be a mistake. I received some placeholder art within the hour, so I didn't have to stare at boxes for too long. I set up some 2D lights, and I couldn't figure out a way to use the sprite's alpha for a shadow mask. I'm not sure if this is possible, so I just manually drew the shadow shape. I also had some problems with 2D lights, where adjusting the layer the light was supposed to affect simply did nothing, and when the light was on the default layer, it would affect everything. If you know how to fix this, or is this a Unity bug, please let me know in the comments. I tried using Cinemachine for a follow camera, but I haven't used the component for a while, so I had some problems. In the end, I just coded a simple follow camera by myself with nothing fancy. At some point I realized we needed to use a perspective camera since we wanted to have depth and parallax in the game. I found out the hard way that Unity's screen-to-world point function doesn't work properly with a perspective camera. I was afraid that raycasting to a dummy physics layer would for sure cause at least some problems, so I was hoping to avoid that. I tried some hacky solutions which didn't work until I remembered Unity's plane class. I remembered seeing this video about using planes to get a mouse position in 3D space, and that solved my problem. How this code works is that we create a plane that is exactly perpendicular to the camera, 0 units away from the world origin, which is the z-depth that our player character is. Then we create a ray and check with the plane class's raycast function if that ray intersects with the plane, and if it does, we get the distance along the ray where the intersection happens. Then we can use the raycast class's function getPoint to get a point along the ray with the input distance, and this gives us our world position. I received a movement animation for an anglerfish and I implemented that. I started developing the other NPC fish, or NPF, non-player fish, if you will. Unity's built-in nav mesh doesn't work in 2D, and I've never coded or used an A-star pathfinding algorithm, so I wasn't going to learn this weekend with the limited time I had anyway. I've been playing around with steering behaviors in another game project, so I yoinked some code from there, and very quickly, with some modifications, I had an invisible game object swimming around the scene. This already kinda looks like fish, doesn't it? I've noticed these past two game jams that having a library of code at your disposal is key to being able to build systems quickly. Obviously, you also gain experience, but there's no reason to invent the wheel twice. I've learned that you won't improve as a developer by watching other people do it. You definitely have to practice, practice, practice. I wanted the fish to move in schools, so I made each individual fish follow the invisible target and added some sine wave offset to each of them to make them seem more organic and random. I haven't worked with sine waves in a while, so this took some trial and error. Last thing I did on day 2 was prepare some prefabs from art assets our level artist Anon Eve had done, with colliders and shadow masks, so she could continue building our game scene. After that, I went to see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny with my girlfriend. At the start of day 3, we still didn't have a full game loop. I started by working on the game state switching between light and dark. How it works is the game controller fires an event which other systems listen to. Then the background fades between two different images, and the global 2D light and the player's angular light fade in and out appropriately. Also, this makes the small fish hurt the player if they come in contact, and the music and ambience tracks crossfade. That's really it. At some point during the day, I noticed that even though collisions were working fine while swimming, the player could dash into walls and rocks. This is because Unity's collision system is meant to work with the rigid body component. It isn't completely dysfunctional when moving object with the transform component, but it certainly isn't meant to handle collisions on fast-moving objects. I had to switch to physics movement, which didn't take long, but I made a crucial mistake while doing so. Can you spot my mistake? I was thinking I could get away with some simpler coding if, instead of reloading the level when the player died, I'd reset all the game elements. Same basic principle, the game controller just fires an event, and all relevant game objects have their own personal reset function, and the game starts over. Currently it's just instant, so it's good enough in case I don't have time to polish it. The game needed some player feedback for when something happens, so I downloaded some sound effects from pixabay.com, I edited them and added them. I was thinking it would be fun if the fish sound evil when they chase the player, but I couldn't think of a good way to use this. I received the UI art, so I made a simple menu, and I took my own advice and made a really simple volume control slider. Back to some player feedback, I made the angler flash red when taking damage. It felt a bit too subtle, so I also added a flashing red outline to make it more clear that this is something you shouldn't do. After that, I polished the player's death sequence with a fade in, out and some delay. I asked our character and UI artist if he could make me a fishbone sprite, so the fish wouldn't just disappear when they're eaten, and I also asked for a game over screen when the player beats the game, just something simple, and he did both of these in less than an hour. I was quite impressed. With 15 minutes until the deadline, we still hadn't made a single build of the game. Take my advice, never build your game for the first time 15 minutes before the deadline. I sincerely regretted this. I had a game-breaking bug where the game state wouldn't switch at the start of the game, so the player could only get killed and couldn't eat any of the fish. The game was basically unplayable. I managed to fix this by forcing the game state to the correct state at the beginning of the scene, but this was a very stressful time in my life. I quickly added a tutorial screen, which is just the controls in a graphic that my friend made. And I tried making a WebGL build of the game, but Unity has updated their WebGL support, and it now takes several times longer than previously. I didn't want to risk it, so I made a downloadable build instead. I built the game and uploaded it with a few minutes to spare. Then I checked the build, and the movement of all the characters was completely broken. This was because of the mistake I made earlier while switching to a physics-based movement system. Now luckily for us, Mark Brown, the host of the Game Jam, added a 1-hour grace period, which I was so grateful for, so I had time to fix my movement bug. I had forgotten that Unity's physics system runs on 50 ticks per second, and you shouldn't do physics calculations in the update function, which runs every frame. So on a high-end PC, the game would easily be doing 200, 300 physics calculations per second. The solution was simple, to change from update to fixed update and change delta time to fixed delta time, and the movement worked just fine. However, this for some reason completely screwed up the rotation of the player character. The code was to flip the local Y scale, yet it would flip the X scale, even if the script responsible for flipping the sprite was disabled. I think this was some sort of Unity bug and I couldn't figure it out, so I just got rid of the rotation completely. I rebuilt the game and uploaded it. Last thing I tried was to make a WebGL build, but sadly I couldn't get it done before the deadline, so our game is only downloadable. This was only my second game jam as a coder and my fourth game jam ever. What I learned this time was that while it's counterintuitive to me personally, it's important to let things be good enough and move on. You really need to get your most important systems in first. Having something good enough complete is better than having something perfect but unfinished. All in all, I spent about maybe 20 hours on this game. I slept both nights, I saw a movie during the weekend. I'm happy with what we got done, and since my friends are professionals, I think the game has a very nice atmosphere despite being quite simple.